Right, we're recording. This is office hours. We've made it into the month of September, everyone. Happy September. Office hours for September 2. There has been a ton of progress. Usually I try and have a more meaningful PR and issue triage section filled out. Even though it may appear that there's not much on the agenda, trust me, there is. We have had, by my count, around 15 PRs updated in the past week that have not been merged yet. I know a number have already been merged. So I wanted to spend a lot of time, well, really all the time on that today. But I figured just as a reminder, we should run through here. Harry, did this one get merged yet? The SNI and mode PR? No, it's not merged.
Nope, it
Okay.
seemed to be almost ready, but I think Bowie had a
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
I will take a look. I think I had a comment on Slack, and yeah, let me take a look again.
Okay. And yeah, TLS route and TLS. Oh, there is a PR for TLS on route. We will for sure get to the, yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Harry, for making this. Somehow I missed reviewing this entirely. I'm not sure how. I know it was even mentioned here. Okay, I will, yeah, well, we'll get to that today. Thank you for all your work on that. We got the route filtering in. Request mirroring, I know I've reviewed this one, I think. Oh, I know I've looked at it. Apparently I didn't leave any comments yet. Okay. More to cover today. UDP route, this is LGTM, but I think it got stuck in the endless path of rebasing all the things. I think it needs another rebase.
This
Yeah.
might need some update because we're trying to unify the routes to have the same structure.
Yeah.
I'll try to take a look at it tomorrow.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I have a PR that would also modify all routes, and so, yeah,
Maybe we need to land. We need to land this then, and then those PRs which bring consistency, so you can hit everything all at once.
Yeah, I think that's probably. I feel bad. Jeremy's been sitting on this PR for a while, so I think it's generally good, and then we can make things consistent afterwards, maybe.
I'm trying to unblock John's remove protobuf generation, so hopefully it reduces some of the stuff.
Yeah, that will help a lot. I have updated this backend policy PR. I actually haven't responded. I need to respond to comments on here. I actually have resolved all of these. I just haven't had a chance to, like literally a few minutes before this meeting, and did not get a chance to respond to Harry's excellent feedback here. Conflict handling. There's a couple PRs in the works here. I should probably add one more linked to this. Hopefully we'll get a chance to cover them. And then finally, status and conditions. I know James has made some great progress with this doc, and I'm excited to see it transition to a PR, and or I guess it could also expand scope a bit for routes and gateway classes. But yeah, I think this is a great start with this doc. So that is everything that I am aware of that needs to get in for a V1 Alpha 1 release. We're getting close, I think, and I'm especially happy to see all the activity and all the PRs coming in this week. And with that said, I think we should probably review some of them and see if we can unblock a number of these PRs. I know there is a lot to get through. I know mine is the most recently updated. Let's start from the bottom. I think James' work is going to update or replace this gateway polarity work. I don't see Damien on this call, so I'll leave closing this for a little bit. I think we've already asked, somebody may have already asked if we can close this.
Yeah, I should
Yeah.
update that and coordinate with Daniel. I think the
Okay.
consensus from last week's discussion, I believe, was that we do want to use positive polarity conditions. Everyone seemed largely on the positive polarity side of the fence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on the positive side of the fence,
Sorry, it was
but
the native.
also,
Sorry, the native polarity. I think was where we ended up.
yeah,
Micah's
yes.
native polarity concept. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Harry, I know you have to leave in 20 or so minutes. Maybe we should cover some of your PRs first here. Are there any particular PRs that you'd like to cover here?
I think let's cover the short one, the request mirroring
Okay.
PR.
Yeah.
So I think that's down there 276.
Okay. Thanks.
I think we probably are pretty much aligned on this one. I just want to get a sense of, if this is essentially, mirroring filter. Mirroring is implemented as a filter, and it has
Yeah.
a forward target and a port. I think that's the entire PR, I guess.
Yeah. And this request mirror filter is effectively just a forward to target without the wait, right?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
There's no concept of it. I did consider, maybe sometimes people want to mirror part of the traffic, but I think
Yeah.
that's more like canarying, and that can
Yeah.
be implemented using traffic splitting rather. So
Yeah, no, I
that's
agree with that. I was just making sure that our terminology was at least consistent, because the concepts here are, basically the same thing as forward to, just a different use. Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
We need to get this PRN to finish the advanced routing
Yeah.
epic or whatever we call it.
And we don't necessarily need to add this to the PR, but I think it's important that we have some kind of documentation that explains it with a mirror or the mirror filter, that there's no response from that target.
Yes, I've made a note in the right there.
Oh yeah, got it. Cool.
Is that enough?
Yeah, no, that works. I just wanted to make sure that it's documented somewhere. So this is the first time I'm looking at the PR, and it was just something in the back of my mind from the mirror stuff I did a while back.
Totally makes sense. Thanks, Daniel.
Great. Yeah, this looks straightforward. I have to say, as I've been looking at PRs over the past few days, thank you to James for updating this, so all the things we don't care about are automatically hidden. It makes PR review just so much nicer. So yes, thank you.
Stole that from Knative folks.
Nice.
It's magic to me as well.
Yes. All right. Well, I will make a note to actually follow up after the meeting, but I'm not seeing anything. I'll have to check for typos or something, but the concept seems really straightforward to me. I don't really have any hesitation. Just take a closer look afterwards. Anyone else seeing anything that is unexpected or not what we want from mirroring? Cool. We'll keep on moving. There's lots to get through.
So next one, let's take a look at 256.
Okay.
I think that's pretty much good to go. Only this is the first PR that has to get in to add in the next set of 2 PRs for TLS config, mainly downstream TLS. So we almost have an agreement, and I would like this PR to land in as soon, because this is the bigger PR and the other 2 PRs sort of build on top of this one. So this introduces a mode bit. I think we've already talked about it a couple of times.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this PR a couple times at this point. I think I've at least LGTM'd it. I think maybe others have as well. Yeah, this remind me again. I think you've mentioned it, but the transition from plural certificates to singular. Um,
Yeah, so I think that's the same comment that Bowie had. So uh, I could be mistaken here, so feel free to correct me. But I think the previous PRs was more about here's a bunch of certificates. Sorry, the previous API was here's a bunch of certificates, and the proxy or the gateway has to ensure that the right certificate is served for the right TLS handshake. What this change sort of goes through is ensures that, okay, here's my host name and please use this specific certificate ref for this host name. Now that could be for a wildcard domain, or that could also be for a specific domain. I mean, specific host name, right? And this, what enables you to do is if you have, certificates that are even incorrectly or badly named, you could still use them. So now if you have like a sort of a self-signed default certificate that you just want to configure first as a certificate ref, you can enable to you could do that if that's needed. So it ties certificate ref closely to the host name of the listener.
I think that reduces the scope.
Is there
of
a use
things that
case
can go
for
wrong.
a bundle that's like glommed together? I guess not. Like, what about a wildcard for a host? Is that a legitimate thing?
So wildcard certificate can be used, right? So here you can point to the same secret which has, so let's back up a little. So can you scroll up a little bit, Rob? I think so here TLS config is inside. I think this is hidden in here, but TLS config is inside the listener element inside HTTP route. The listener is configured either as a wildcard match on the domain, or it's configured as the exact match on the domain. And the matching of certificate follows the same thing, right? So if you specify a wildcard match for a host name in that listener, uh, all the wildcard subdomains use the same TLS config, which is the same certificate.
The thing is, you don't need to do matching on anything in the certificate, because you have the matching kind specified as part of a listener, and you have one certificate ref, so you just have it, right? You don't
Yes.
need to now, because of this change, you don't need to specify any sort of matching process through the slice of certificate refs.
Correct. And the intent here is to make the API sort of more deterministic.
Right, I see.
Sense.
So there is no possibility of having multiple, like a one-to-many relationship. That simply doesn't make sense. Like, there is absolutely no case there. That was mostly
Exactly.
my question: is there a case?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it usually doesn't. For trusted like CA certificates, it makes sense, but for serving a certificate for a SNI or hostname, it does not.
Okay, I think that
This
satisfies
potential-
my query.
You go ahead,
Damien, were
Bowie.
you going to say something?
Yeah, I was. But Bowie, go ahead and finish up what you were saying, and I'll jump in.
I just said that satisfies my query. Like, I was wondering if there was any situations. Thanks.
What
I think
about
you can
this use
still have a
case?
situation. So go ahead, Michael.
Yeah. What about this use case? So, I guess the use case generally is like certificate expiration, right? So if we get a route and we've got a server certificate tied to that route host name, it's going to expire. And if we supported multiple certificates as that certificate was getting ready to expire, we could add the upcoming certificate to use, so that when it does expire, the new certificate can be used from that list of certificates, as opposed to just having a single certificate tied to the hostname.
Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. So the way usually most proxies work is they can serve only one specific certificate at a time for a given SNI, right? Even if you configure two certificates, and maybe you can have the intelligence baked into the proxy where it can choose the right certificate. But as far as like Envoy and Nginx, I'm familiar with, and even cloud load balancers, they serve like a single certificate. And expiration and rotation is a little easier in this case because you can sort of atomically replace the certificate that you want to serve, right? Instead, in case of like if you have a CS certificate bundle and a certificate is expiring, in that case you definitely do need multiple CS certificates to be present at a time, so that you can verify against multiple CS certs, even if one CS cert is expiring soon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm following you. I'm
Yeah,
interested to go ahead, Billy.
yeah, it's an interesting thing. Is like, is certificate rotation something that is the feature of the distribution of certificates? Because as Harry said, at any one time there can only be one. So people just make a time periods of validity overlap, and at some point you're going to have to switch. But it's not, the switching doesn't happen at the proxy layer. It actually happens when you're trying to distribute it.
Okay, so it'd be the responsibility of some cert manager that would know the cert that's used by this route when it's going to expire and create a new certificate and then update the certificate reference before the expiration.
Correct. And that is how
Got it.
it works with Sort Manager and Ingress v1 beta 1 and v1 today.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Any more comments on this PR?
Yeah, I think I'll finish the review. Otherwise, it looks good. That was my only question.
Great.
I think other PRs you require more feedback and like asynchronous feedback. The one thing that we can discuss, Rob, is 273, which is probably pretty involved, where we are talking about, it's a little down. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so where we are discussing, what is a route, what is an action versus what is a filter. And this PR is actually pretty small. It just tries to make action as a required parameter. And I think that is all it does. What conversations we are having is like, does it make sense for action to not be required, right? And there are definitely some cases where it does not, like if there is a filter which performs a redirect, or which is a permanent redirect, maybe it does not make sense. But then should that like redirect be part of the action, or should it be filter, right? So that's what the confusion is. Rob has proposed something, and then James also has. What James has proposed makes a lot of sense. I think it was discussed while I was not present, but if we sort of have sort of a general agreement, I can close this PR out and simplify our Go structs to update what James has proposed.
Yeah, for context, what I'd originally proposed was that an action was kind of the terminating thing. It was forward redirect or some kind of extension. But later on, I think we did discuss this, is a James proposal here, which just simplifies everything. It's either a filter or a forward, and that's it. And I think this is really straightforward.
I think this is the same as Rob's
yeah.
concept. This is the same as your concept, Rob, except we lose the word action, which kind of because action brings in a bunch of connotations for people.
Yeah, and in this case, forward is optional. Correct?
Possibly. I think that there's a distinction between whether forwarding is practically optional or also syntactically optional.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting.
We could go
because
either way on that.
The way I saw it when I was proposing this, there are some, filters generally, in my mind, were things that modify an action, and actions were things that were terminal in the sense that if you had a filter that was redirect to, or when a redirect happens, there's generally nothing happening after that. That is the end. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but we'll just say that's the end. And that, the forward needs to be optional if redirect exists in filters, right? Because if you have a redirect somewhere in filters, then you don't want someone to have to specify a forward that's never going to happen.
Well, redirects often happen conditionally.
That's true. Often, yes. But not always. Often,
Sure.
yes.
Not always. Not always.
I think I'm in favor of this approach as long as we suggest that forward itself is an optional. And then I think what you're saying here is this would actually be HTTP forwarding target. Am I understanding? Or
Oh yes. Sorry. That's terrible cut and paste. Sorry about that. That's forwarding target. Sorry.
And at that point, do we even need an extension ref in here, or can we just have forward go directly to forward to target and extensions happen inside filters?
I think we do need an extension ref there because this is basically how you specify the hop from the proxy to the back end, and that seems like something where implementations are going to. That seems like something where implementations are going to extend, like I don't know, quality of service or transport security or some additional load balancing parameters.
I agree with James that we do need extension ref, but the examples James gave here, I think those are more aligned with backend
They're all
policy.
terrible.
No, they align with backend policy, right? They don't fit in with the extension ref here. So I would rather think, this extension ref, for example, forwarding to an S3 bucket, or or maybe forwarding to outside the cluster to something else, right?
Yeah, those are good use cases. And I think there's an open question about whether people will use the extension ref to modify the forward target or to replace the forward target.
Interesting.
I'd imagined it as a modifier, but it sounds like Harry, imagining it as a replacement.
Yeah, I imagined it as a replacement, and I was like thinking more like service level config and the problems we're solving there. That's the place where people or users rather can modify the behavior of communication between the gateway and the next hop.
Great. Well, I appreciate the suggestion here. I think it's a great one. Any other comments on this PR before we move on? Okay, Harry, I know you have only a couple minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to cover here?
No, I think rest of the PRs haven't had much feedback at all. So just asking folks to take a look at it, and then we can probably have some discussion in office hours next week.
Sounds good. Great. Okay, so I think I'll work back from I don't know if there's a good or bad way to do this. I know I don't want to cover this because I have a newer PR. Customize support. This is a really easy one. Thanks to John for adding this back. We accidentally removed customize support. So yeah, think that's good. We already covered this. Just go ahead.
Rob, really quick, if you click on that add customized support, there should be a link to a PR that I created today that goes with that. Did I reference it somewhere? Keep going down, maybe. Fixes install make target. That's.
Thank you. Yeah, this was my only comment. I think it's great. I noticed actually as I was doing a review somewhere else that we had something that would have violated, I think, Go format or at least Go lint, and I thought, well, we should have verify catching that. And then I saw this PR like right after that. Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, we used to catch it because we ran one of the coup builder make targets that called. So yeah, I haven't looked at it since I submitted it, so I'll take a look at your feedback and update the PR.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it was just a simple little thing of we had format and vet in both make files, and yeah. Anyway, cool. Okay, covered this one. Downstream TLS certificate. I think Harry had mentioned that this hasn't gotten much feedback, so this is more of a reminder that we should provide feedback, and this I didn't even notice this PR come in, so that's my fault for not already giving some feedback. I'm glad it exists, but this is my very first time looking at it, so I don't have much to add at this point other than that we should all take a closer look whenever there's time. Okay. The TLS route, I think, falls under the same category, except it has gotten some feedback. Wow, Harry is just making all the PRs in the world. This is great. We've discussed these two. This is just a pure cleanup PR. This was to avoid blocking a previous PR. I think it's really straightforward. It just cleans up some names, and I think it also may have fixed. Yeah, it does fix. This would have been a Go format. Yeah, or maybe Go lint. Go lint. Yeah, we don't run Go lint. That's why. But this is a little typo and a couple other things as far as naming. So I think this is already LGTM'd and straightforward. Yeah, okay. Let's keep on moving our way up here. Okay, this one's gonna take a while. Sure, we'll get into this one. All right, I was really lucky to get some great feedback from Tim on this API. I spent a couple hours on Friday going through the API and reviewing it with him, and he had some great feedback, and I'm going to try and clean up my notes and make it a little bit more digestible and share it a bit more broadly. But I thought it was good kind of intermittent feedback, and one of his confusions or things that didn't make sense lined up with something I'd done but never loved, and that was the allowed route namespaces on gateway class. It felt overly complex and confusing, and it also meant that gateway class was not just covering authorization on the level below, it was covering authorization 2 levels below. So not just for gateway, but also for routes. It made for a relatively messy implementation and understanding. And so we talked about potential alternatives, and this is my interpretation of, that he did not say do exactly this, to be clear. But I think this is a good step in the direction that we had been discussing. So instead of having allowed route namespaces on gateway class, I thought, why don't we switch this around and make the authorization happen on routes? So for a gateway to reference a route in a different namespace, the route has to agree to it. That's maybe the easiest way to describe this. Within the same namespace, everything just works by default. Everyone's happy, hurrah. But across namespaces, both the gateway and route have to agree. So there's some kind of bidirectional agreement. I know we'd already discussed this kind of bidirectional route namespace route gateway connection, but I think this may be a little bit lighter and less config heavy, because the default case doesn't require any kind of config on the route. So with that said, my proposal would add a route gateways field, well, just a gateways field on route at the same level, at the very top level, right alongside hosts. And by default, you're not going to have to touch this. The default implementation here is going to be allow same namespace. So it says gateways in the same namespace can use this route, and that's it. That's default on, same behavior as we already have. But we also have two other ways that we could do matching. Allow list would say only gateways that I've specified in this separate list will be able to use this route. Or secondary, allow all, which means, and I'm really hesitant to even add this option, but it would mean that any gateway anywhere can use this route and it's fine. That, I don't know how I feel about that, but I imagine that there are some use cases where it could be helpful. So the actual struct is really straightforward. You have allow and a list of gateway references. So the allow by default is just going to be same namespace, and that's it. Everything works as it does. But if you want to get a little bit more specific, you can change from same namespace to say list, and then actually list out references to gateways that should be allowed to use this route. Yeah, that was the idea here. It dramatically decreases the blast radius. One of the big problems with having this kind of attribute on the gateway class level is it dramatically, well, just had a massive blast radius. A change there could invalidate tons of routes for tons of gateways. It was not great. This means if you change something, it's going to affect just that route. That's it. It also feels easier to understand, and it means that to do multi-namespace route selection, you need the owner of the route and the owner of the gateway to agree, and that's it. You don't need to get a gateway class admin involved. That seemed like a reasonable compromise to me. But with that said, I'm very open to feedback and ideas on how we might improve this. This was just my first go at a different approach here.
I like it. I think it's interesting because I know we were going back and forth with this a while back. And it was always, okay, does the gateway bind to the route or does the route bind to the gateway? And this is essentially saying it's like a two-way binding.
Yeah.
I like it.
Cool. I thought that, so the original notion behind the allowed routes, wasn't that to my understanding was it's basically to prevent bad actors in the cluster from injecting things into the gateway.
Yes.
But this doesn't prevent that anymore?
Because it's bidirectional, the way I imagine implementations are going to do this is first they will select every route that matches whatever the gateway route selector says it should select. So that includes the list of namespaces it should look in, and and whatever labels it should look for on those routes. And then from there, when it gets that list of routes, it's going to look at this gateways attribute on each one and say, no, I can't use this one. No, I can't use this one, but I can use this one. And so there's that kind of two levels. So the gateway has to say that it wants this set of routes, and then the route set has to agree to be selected. So the real concern that I had previously in the whole notion of the gateway class level attribute here was previously there was no way to prevent a gateway from selecting a route in a completely different namespace other than this gateway class attribute. If a route existed, it could be selected. That was the problem. And so this adds some basic security, I guess you could say, or authorization that one ensures that by default,
I think
routes can only
the biggest one would be like.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue there is not even just security, like fat finger.
Yeah.
Like I accidentally instantiated a test route, and then like suddenly, boom, it blows up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I've got the PR in front of me now. But so the thing previously it was like the gateway class could specify which namespaces the gateways in this class were allowed. So you had top-down control, policy control from the class across all the gateways.
Right. Yeah, and to clarify, I'm not actually removing that aspect. So there is still a field on gateway class that restricts where that gateway class can be used. So it restricts where gateways can be created. We had a second field on gateway class that restricted where gateways of this class can reference routes. And that's the one I'm suggesting removing.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is that the policy controls in your proposal are don't do the same things.
Sure.
Like
Yeah. So that's true. I think it's a reasonably safe compromise in the sense that if you have a route owner and a gateway owner agreeing to something, it's probably a fairly safe thing to do. What the issue we had with the gateway, one of the issues we had with the gateway class level authorization field, the allow route namespaces, is if you wanted different variations of that, you actually had to create an entirely new gateway class, which felt like, maybe not ideal. This external load balancer gateway class can, I don't know, reference routes in these three namespaces, and this other class can reference routes in these other three namespaces. That felt, not ideal. That's just my perspective on this. But are there any particular controls that you think we're losing here that are significant, or that we can't communicate well this way?
So I think it's just.
I like it. This was in the original proposal, by the way.
Yeah.
I think it's just changing the security model a little bit. So previously, you from the gateway class, you specify that you trust some namespaces to create gateways, but you also scoped the routes. So now now the gateway class is delegating more trust down to the gateways to say, okay, we trust you to do the right thing with routes in general.
Yeah, that's true.
Which doesn't seem. I mean, it seems pretty. It's much more. It's consistent with the with ingress.
I also feel like this is more natural because having to muck with a gateway class to define which routes you can attach, it seems a little onerous.
But because the security model is different, then it I guess isn't going to address the same use cases that caused us to do the route namespaces in the first place. Is it?
I think it's going to address the critical ones. You're right that it won't address all of them, but I think, at least from my perspective, as I was initially working on the security model, one of the big concerns was that a gateway could reference any route. If it could reference routes across namespaces, it could reference anything. And there was really almost no control of that we had, no meaningful authorization. So if you let someone create a gateway, regardless of what namespace that gateway was in, it could reference, routes anywhere. I admit that there still is, with this model, we are delegating more trust to admins of both gateways and routes, because somebody, Bowie mentioned fat fingering, the new version of fat fingering, or whatever, would be creating a route and letting anything target it. The allow all kind of thing. That is the new risk model of somebody created a route somewhere and let any gateway target it. You probably shouldn't do that. But if you did, that is a real risk here. But beyond that, the only other way to allow a gateway to reference a route is actually outside of the same namespace, is to actually list that gateway as a reference. And that feels pretty safe and very clearly intentional. I didn't want to require that for everything, because that felt like a lot of overhead to always have to reference the gateway, especially in the same namespace. But I think for multi-namespace references, we want it to be very clear that this route is being referenced by this gateway way over here. So maybe an argument, maybe this is all an argument to remove the option of all. Maybe we shouldn't even consider that. Maybe we should only allow same namespace or list. I don't know.
I think there's definitely a case like we get it in the Contour community where people want to set up some top level thing with a selector that just pulls in routes. So I think that using all is going to be a common case.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping all as well, just for the simple usability use cases.
And I think my initial reaction to this proposal is it's good. It's great. I just wanted to kind of call out the changes in the security model, so we would discuss it explicitly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I did try to update that. Like I did update the security model doc here, so I'd appreciate some review on this section as well, if anyone has time to take a look. But yeah, it is a change. It is definitely a change to how this is implemented. I hope it's a slightly easier thing to implement in the future. And hopefully a little bit better user experience as well. Okay, well, thanks for the feedback on this one. I'll move on to the next one because I know there is still lots to get through here. This one is also mine. It updates parameters ref. For the longest time, we had a problem in the spec that inferred that the local object reference, that is parameters ref on gateway class, should reference anything in any namespace, but we didn't actually have a way to specify namespace. And so the Go doc did not match up with what was actually possible. And so my initial PR was actually the complete opposite of this. And I'll bring that up just for a bit of context. back in the day, I made this PR, which was, hey, we should add a namespace to parameters ref inside gateway class so that we can optionally reference namespace scope resources. And so, you know, I thought, okay, this makes sense. But before I went any further with this, I took this to SIG Network, the broader community, because as you're aware, gateway class is entirely parallel to the ingress class resource that exists in the ingress API. And we also intentionally opted not to add a namespace reference there. And the rationale at that point had been, we should be referencing CRDs. We want the CRD validation. We want, you know, there's very minimal advantage over referencing, say, a namespace scope config map over just annotations. You know, it's just a map, right? There's not a whole lot of value here, and we really want to push implementations and users towards CRDs that provide a schema, some validation, a clear understanding of what you can and cannot configure. So that was, and then the last bit was that any kind of parameters should, at least in theory, exist at the same level as the gateway class, as the thing it's being referenced by. So this all generally made sense, but we'd had a whole lot of discussion that I won't rehash internally in the service APIs community that still had some interest in a namespace scope thing. I was somewhat convinced enough to make this, but when I took it back to the SIG network community to see if we could get the same level of consensus for the ingress API, it wasn't there. The overwhelming response that I got was that we don't want to do this for ingress class. And given that we didn't want to do this for ingress class, it's very hard to argue that we should do it here. It seems like if we want to do it here, we need to convince the broader SIG network community that it should be done elsewhere. I don't feel strongly enough to lead that charge. I see both sides of this, but what I do see right now is our Go doc as it exists right now is inconsistent, and we should make it clear that this is meant to reference a custom resource at the cluster scope. One other bit that if anyone's still on the fence here, it's a lot easier to add a namespace field in the future to allow namespace scope references than to remove it. So not having it does not mean we can't have it in the future. It just, we don't have it right now. This is consistent with ingress class, etc. And really all this PR is doing is cleaning up the docs to match what is actually possible right now. Yeah, that is a really high level, actually not that high level, a background of this PR. With all that background, does anyone have any thoughts about this whole conversation? I know we've had some strong opinions one way or the other as far as this. Does anyone feel strongly that's in this group here? Okay, definitely leave some comments on this PR. It does seem like a relatively straightforward PR. It just happens to have a lot of history behind it that this PR on its own may not show. So I wanted to provide a little bit more background. I have linked to it further down here. But yeah, I will leave this this PR as is. If anyone has more thoughts, feel free to add a comment there. Yeah. Okay. I see our pull request number is going down. We must be getting some PRs in. Oh, yeah, the ones that, okay, cool. The other ones I think are all actually fairly straightforward. I think this is worth discussing as a broader group. It feels weird to me, but I was generally fine with it at the end. TCP route match is one that we have. It's just an extension ref. Like, we don't know how to match TCP routes, so it's just an extension to do whatever you want, I guess. And the weird thing here is the idea that we should pluralize it to be consistent with what we have elsewhere. I get that, and I'm glad we are being consistent, but it does feel a little bit weird to pluralize, a match where your only potential thing is an extension ref. I think it's fine. It's a thing that is happening that may seem a little strange.
So I guess my rationale for that was that an implementation could have 3 or 4 different extension refs that express different kinds of matches. And it would be awkward to then have to have another extension ref which just basically pluralizes the field.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm really interested in what these extensions are going, what these match extensions might end up looking like. But it seems like a pretty low risk change, and it is consistent with the other route types. So cool. Any other comments on this one?
I guess just there was the one that we just discussed earlier in HTTP route where we talked about action. So whatever we do there, we should propagate that change all the way through the other route types.
Yeah, we are
After
running
landing.
into, we are quickly running into this, I don't want to call it a problem, but it is an issue that will become more common as we introduce more route types. It means, for the sake of consistency, we'll be changing the same field multiple times across multiple routes. Not the end of the world, but it is just something we'll be doing more of. All right, I think, let me double check here. Damien's PR, we briefly discussed to install a make target. Yeah, let's cover my backend policy thing here real quick. So I got some great feedback from Harry on this one. We've already talked about backend policy, and I've dramatically simplified it. It is just TLS config. Harry pointed out that it made no sense to use the same TLS config type here because we're talking about basically client, config at this point. So I have added a backend TLS config that includes client certificate ref and certificate authority refs and options being the same thing that exists in TLS config. This seems relatively straightforward at this point, but I don't pretend to be a TLS expert either, so I'd appreciate any kind of feedback here. My goal with backend config is to provide a model for configuring backends. I don't want it just to be focused on TLS. That seemed like the most obvious thing that we had to have at this level. I am very open to adding other things in the future. I just wanted to have a resource that exists that covers this use case. I think.
Yeah, the CA might not be relevant.
Yeah. Yeah, these are all.
That seems like that belongs on the server side.
Well, okay, so the argument is like, say, Nginx or something like that it provides, I think they call it trusted certificate or something like that, but an Envoy has a similar concept. And the idea is that if you're using a self-signed cert or something like that, you can provide your kind of custom CA here for validation. Does that seem sensible, or are you thinking something else?
So I guess I missed the context on this a little bit. My attention wandered, so I apologize. Is the idea that in the client certificate ref, you have just your certificate, but then you have the CA bundle in the certificate authority refs?
Yeah.
So at least what we do in Contour, and Cert Manager does this too, is you stuff the CA bundle in the same secret with the ca.crt
Okay.
key. I know Bowie looked at my PR to kind of, I'm doing air quotes now, but you can't see. I'm doing air quotes, standardize this upstream, but there's I think, but the usage of that key is different in Ingress Nginx. So I think there's kind of consensus across the Ingress community that in a secret, ca.crt key can be used to store a CA bundle, but there's not consensus around which certificate that CA bundle corresponds to, whether it's the CA bundle of the peer you're validating or the CA bundle of the certificate that's in the same secret.
Got it. That makes sense. So with basically what you're saying is with an appropriate specification, which seems easy enough to establish in a new API, we could squash this all together into a single client certificate ref and then just explain that, let's say, ca.cert is where your certificate bundle should live.
Yeah. I guess this ties into, I know Micah described how OpenShift deals with TLS secrets specifically too, so you can kind of have least privileged ingresses that don't need to be able to have access to all secrets. But I think that feels like, that specifying that feels like a larger post V1 Alpha 1 task.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I know we have gone over. Thank you to everyone for the feedback here. It's very helpful. I'll update the PRs I'm involved in, and yeah, we'll talk to y'all soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, have a good one.
Thanks, bye.